20 Angry Birds. We drew 10 backgrounds to match those Angry Birds. Or was it 10? 5. It was 5. Then we drew 5 backgrounds for those Angry Birds. Then we took 3 of those Angry Birds and we drew them in Illustrator. Then we drew 1 background for one of those birds in Illustrator. So now what I'm going to show is how do we then take this artwork that we've created and actually put it into After Effects and animate it. Okay? So if you get done with your sign flipping, you can start this part of it. If you are on break next week and you want to get going with it, then get going with it. Okay? So this is, not that, that. This is my Angry Birds so far. Oops, not there. Number 1. Okay, so this isn't the so far version. This is the before I show you the next stuff version. So here you can see I have some water, I have some clouds in there, I have a background, I have a little raft. Now my raft, my bird's gonna be bouncing from raft to raft. And in this scenario, I didn't want to draw 4 separate rafts, I'm just gonna use the same raft. So in Illustrator, I only need 1 raft, okay? So in order for me to take all of these pieces and be able to draw them or animate them separately, which they are, I have to make sure in Illustrator I have all that stuff set up correctly. So in Illustrator, background here. So this was my original background that I had set up. And a lot of this is planning. If you looked at any of the stuff that we've done, a lot of this stuff is just making sure that everything works and is nice. So every single object that I want to animate separately, I've put on a separate layer. Okay, now if I open up one of these things, you'll see that a group is not a layer. Like this is not a layer. It actually has to be a fully separated layer. Come on, there we go. So any item like this cloud, let's say, I made a new layer and then I dragged the little icon to the new layer in order to make that a new layer. And then I double clicked it and I call this cloud 6. I'll just delete that one. And then this one I'll call raindrop. I wanted to animate a raindrop inside here. Okay, this is gonna be my sad Angry Bird. That's the background I used for him. So I want to have rain kind of happening in the background. I don't want to create a bunch of rain in Illustrator and then try to animate that. I'm going to have one that I can duplicate inside of After Effects and animate all of these things kind of raining down. So I only needed 1 actual raindrop. And then here's my raft. All of that's on 1 layer. Perfect. And then there are my clouds. You'll see that I have differences in the line width. Those are things that add detail to your stuff. Those are things that make your stuff kind of pop out a bit more. And I've still kept it kind of cartoony, which is great. Here's my water. Each one of these things have a different color to them, which is wonderful. Okay, so I've saved this out as an Illustrator file with all my layers separated. And then on my Angry Bird, I need to do the exact same thing. So here is my sad bird right here. Now he is not separated. You'll see that he has only a couple parts. He has this and he has that. Those are the 2 parts that are that make him up. So if I brought this into After Effects, I would just have those 2 parts that I could animate, which doesn't really give me a lot of stuff to play with. So I want to animate a couple things. Like let's say these strokes I want to animate. Okay, so I'm going to make it a new layer. I'm going to drag these to the new layer. I'm going to label this eyebrows. I'm going to make sure my caps lock's off. I want to animate his pupils or his eyes here and here. So I'm going to grab both of those, put them on a new layer. Okay, I probably want to animate his tail also, so I'll make a new layer for his tail. I'll drag it to there, call this tail. It popped into the front of it, so I just move it below it. There we go. And then this is going to be the outline, so I'll just put this on outline. And there's still something on here. Oops. Oh, all of these strokes are still on there. So I need to make sure I grab all of those and drag those to that tail also. There we go. Okay, it's very important that you take the time to do all of those. If you don't take the time, you get into After Effects, get too far along, you're kind of screwing yourself, because then you have to go back and re-import stuff in and reline it up and whatever else. I don't know if I want to do anything with the beak yet, so just in case, I'll put on a new layer. And then this will be just the bird. Okay, so there's the bird. Let's turn all these off so we can see what they all are. There you go. So I have the tail, I have the outline, I have the bird, I have the beak, I have the eyes, and I have the eyebrows. Okay, so those are all different things that I want for the Angry Bird, so I'm just going to save this as. I'm going to call it Sad Bird Cleaned. That way I know that's the version where I cleaned it up. I organized it, he's ready to go. So now when I come into After Effects, I'm going to make a new project. Don't save. I'm going to import my bird, so I double click. I go and find my bird. It's in the artwork folder, and here's Sad Bird Cleaned and Angry Bird background. Now I'm bringing these in as composition, retain layer size. So every time we do this kind of workflow, we're typically going to go to composition, retain layer size. Okay, so if I double click my background, I get a composition that's sized exactly to what I need it to be. It's 1920 by 1080. It read that from Illustrator when I brought it in. You'll also notice that I have some layers that are actually bigger, because I may want my water to go pretty far. So in Illustrator, when I drew that background, I actually drew way past this, because I know that I want stuff to come in off screen and go on screen. So you have to plan for that stuff inside of Illustrator. If everything fit perfectly inside here, it wouldn't work. Okay, I couldn't have my water move. All right, so now what I want to do is animate my waves. So I'm going to show a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to hide everything else. I'm going to open up my wave 1, and I'll show you how I could animate this. So one way would be exactly what we've done before, is hitting the position keyframe. And you can see how I'm just kind of moving this back and forth. There we go. So now I get something like this. And that's about as quick as it's going to go. Let's say I wanted to just soften these just so they're easy eased. So it doesn't look like it's such a harsh transition. So that kind of looks like water. Okay, so that's definitely one way that I could animate these things. I could also go in and maybe give them a little bit upward movement. Maybe some downward movement every once in a while. Okay, so again, we have something very kind of boring, but it works, right? There's other ways we could get them to ripple and roll. There's other stuff we could definitely play with. For now, we're just going to stick with that. Okay. So that's the water. That's one way we could do it. Now this way leads us to, let's say I wanted it to happen faster. I have to go back and reanimate every single one of these keyframes. That's kind of like a big hassle to have to do. So I'm going to turn that off. And I'm going to do this with an expression. And you'll find that expressions can be very, very helpful in what you're trying to do. Just so we can see what happens with this, I'm going to set that off to the side. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called a sine wave. So I'm going to say the sine of time. Perfect. There we go. Oops. Math dot sine. Oh. And this says time global not exist. Yes, it does. Okay. So that was working. I just forgot the other thing I had to do. That's what I had in there. All right. Just didn't want to work that time. All right. So this is what I typed in here. So our position is two values, right? It's X and Y. That's what we're dealing with right now. So what this does is it does this thing called a sine formula. So if you remember from high school math classes, they have these things called sine waves that basically just go up and down. That's all they do. It's just a big up and down wave. So what it's going to do is it's going to go up and down based on time. Okay, so the faster time happens, the faster it's going to go up and down. Okay, so this is kind of a wave, so I don't want it to go like crazy up and down. So I'm going to make this maybe the sine of time times 10. So it should go, let's say, 10 times quicker. All right. Now it's also offset itself. Okay. So what the sine wave does is it's all based on -1 to +1 to -1 to +1. So my guy is actually oscillating from -1 to +1 way up here. So we can't really see what he's doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this value times itself. Okay, and then what that should give me is the ability to tweak that stuff. And I may need to do this individually, so I'm at the time. Now when you get the little error, you look at it and see what it says. Property, da 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 da. And the easiest thing, just click on it and drag it. Oh, it wanted that. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now I can take this and move it into position like that. There we go. And then now if we look at it, you can see it's very slowly moving, right? It's very, very, very slowly moving. Okay? So this is what I've done is I've taken this, and what I'm doing is I'm adding in that transform position. Okay? So this little bracket with an O means take the first position, which is X. And then this little bracket with a 1 means take the second position, which is the Y. Okay, so I'm saying do the same formula. Like this. So this needs the X value. So here's X right there. So go from -1 to +1. And then for Y, do the same thing, -1 to +1. Now to get it to offset, I'm just adding in whatever it already had. That way it should jump down to where it was and then just oscillate from there. So it's doing exactly this, just going really quick. So I'm going to take this number here and I'm going to multiply it times, let's say 30. There we go. So I took this, multiplied it times 30. Okay, so this gives me right here, instead of going from -1 to +1, this goes from -30 to +30. Okay, that's what that's telling it to do. So this is what I get. So if I want to slow it down, I can go back to this number here where it says 10 and just make this like 3. It'll go a third of how fast it was going. So I'm going to just set that to 3. I'm going to set this to 3. And now you can see this is going a lot slower because I've slowed down that speed that it was going. Now what's happening is if we look at this, it's not kind of going in a waveform, which is kind of like a circle. It's going on this big diagonal. So it looks kind of weird in how it's doing that. What I want to do is have it go in a circle form. So instead of this sine, and it doesn't matter how this works, I just make it cosine, which is the other one. Oops. And when I make it cosine, you can see now it's going in a circle. Okay? So here's the formula that I use, this bottom one, to make this wave, this item, just kind of go in the circle form. If I want more movement, I change this number. If I want it to go faster, I change that number. Okay? So the bigger this number is, the faster it's going to go. If I change this number, the bigger the distance it's going to go. So instead of going in this 30 unit circle here, I can have it go into like a huge circle if I really, really wanted to. Okay? Now I'm showing you this because, again, I want you to see these things, because if you get into motion graphics, that stuff is your like lifeblood, because it just makes things so much easier. Because watch what I can do. If I copy this expression and then I go down to wave number 2, I hit P on it, I alt click it, I paste that expression, and then I'm just going to move it up a little bit. There it is. And then I hit play. You can see how they're both going in sync, and obviously that looks kind of weird, both going in sync. So let me just offset some of these parameters. So instead of this being 30, I'll make it 40. And instead of it being 3, I'll make it 2. Because it's further away, I think it would probably go a little bit slower. So just by changing a couple values, you can see I have animations offset for these two items. And then when I copy that expression, I go to wave number 3, I paste it in there, and then I change my 2 to just a 1, and then my 40 to maybe a 50. And make sure it's on, make sure I can see it, so I'm just going to scoot it up a bit. There we go. So now, very quickly, I've created 3 separate animations, totally out of sync from each other. Okay, so you can see the power of this, where if I had 50 layers, I could do the exact same thing. Okay? So that's how I animated the waves in my example one. Then I have the clouds here. Okay, now there's expressions I definitely could write for clouds too. There's loads of expressions out there. So where's my, I don't have that open yet. And there's not a whole lot of documentation on, like, here's how you make stuff do this or that or whatever. You have to just kind of go out there and poke around until you find the exact thing you're looking for. So, like, here's the Adobe help, and the Adobe help is none at all. There's a couple things here, but that's about it. Okay. School of Motion has a bunch of expression stuff inside here. So this one is pretty cool, where you actually, I think it's this one, you set it up so that the hands of this clock actually work. So that it actually like ticks every second or every frame or something like that. Okay, imagine trying to animate something like that. It would be very time consuming. So there's expressions all over the place. So I'm going to use a different expression on these guys. Nope, not that, wrong program. So I'm going to grab all the clouds, and I'm going to just go back to the beginning of this animation. I'm going to set a keyframe here. I'm going to go to the end of the animation, and I'm just going to pull all these forward. Now, at no point did I actually set up how long my composition is. I don't know how long the composition is, right? Because my Angry Bird hasn't started bouncing yet. So I have no idea how long this is actually going to be. Right now, it's just set up to about 25 seconds. So I may increase that time or decrease that time. With my waves, it doesn't matter. My waves are going to go that fast regardless of how many frames I have. If I have 2 seconds or 20 seconds or 20 minutes, my waves are going to constantly do what they're already doing. My clouds will not. My clouds will start here and stop there, and that's the end of them. Okay, so I have my clouds doing this now, so they just go woo, like that. All right. Now to give them a little bit more detail to them, I'm going to make them a 3D layer. So I'm going to click the 3D layer button right here, and I'm going to randomly just kind of push some of these back. So I'm going to go to their Z and just adjust their positioning. So I'll pull that one forward. I'll push that one back more. Push that one back more. And you'll see that just by doing this, I'm going to get different animations on them. It's going to appear that I have some sort of depth on these, which I really don't have any depth on them. All right, so that should be good there. And then what I'm going to do is just make sure that whatever value is here, this negative 596, that it's also at the end. Okay, because I set my X and Y first, and then I made it a 3D layer, it didn't take that initial thing. So negative 196 for that one. And then this one is 966. And this one is 750. And this one is 699. And this one is negative 367. There we go. Okay. So now, just based on that, if we look at it, let me turn my background on. It's really hard to see. Background, there we go. All right, so you can see that they are moving. It's very slow in how they're moving, but you can also see that there's a difference. The clouds that are up close are moving different than the clouds that are really far away. Okay, so we could exaggerate that further too if I decided I wanted to take, let's say, this cloud and really push him further, and this cloud and really push it further. And maybe these back clouds I'll just push back a little bit further like that. There we go. So now we have, again, just some kind of randomness in there. You don't want to grab everything and just animate everything as one because it looks kind of fake. I'm also not going to go through these keyframes and make them easy ease, because a cloud wouldn't do that. It wouldn't just like pick up speed and then gradually slow down. It just moves. It's what clouds do. All right, so we look at the start and end of this. If I kind of watch it a little bit quicker, you can see how we definitely have some movement inside there where it looks like these clouds are actually at a different depth. Okay, so I still want to add maybe a little bit more tweaking to them. So I'm going to add a little expression onto each one of these. Okay, so I'm going to Alt-click on position, and I'm just going to say wiggle, and I'm going to put in how often I want it to wiggle. Let's say once per second. And then how big of a movement do I want on this? Let's say, just for fun, 50. All right. So what it's going to do now is it takes the animation. The animation is still going to go across, but this wiggle is actually going to kind of wiggle the whole thing around a little bit. So if we look at cloud number 1, which is this one here, you can see how he's moving. Okay? So you can see that he still moves across the screen, but he's also wiggling his way around the screen. Okay? So once per second, maybe a little bit too much. Maybe I'll do it 0.25 times. And maybe 50 is too much, so I'll make that 20. Okay? So this is the expression right here that I'm using on that one. So I'm saying wiggle. Every 4 frames, do a wiggle, and then make it 20 units. So it's basically going to just set a keyframe every 20 or every 4 seconds and move it 20 units in some random direction. So you'll see now it's much more subtle. It looks like the cloud's kind of coming up and then going down a little bit, and then probably coming up and then going down, and maybe a little bit back and maybe a little bit forward. Okay, so just to see that kind of happen a little bit quicker, see what that's doing now. So again, I could take this expression, go to my next cloud and paste it, go to my next cloud and paste it, and I'm just alt-clicking on that little stopwatch and then pasting that in there. And it's not eliminating the animation, it's just adding to it. Okay? Now you might think that because I put the same expression on each one, that they're all going to move the exact same wiggly, but they don't. It's a random thing. It's like every 4 seconds it gets a random number between 0 and 20, and it moves at that distance. So cloud 1 might be 20, cloud 2 might be 5, the next one might be 12, the next one might be something else. So you can see how each one of these clouds is moving in kind of a sporadic fashion. Now I'm going pretty quick with this in just scrubbing, but this goes a lot slower. It's a lot more subtle. That's what we want. We want it to look soft. We want it to look subtle. Okay? So there's that. Here's my raindrop. So I want to animate this raindrop happening. Okay? Now there's a bunch of ways to do this. I'm going to make a new layer. Oops. So I'm going to make a new solid, make it the comp size. And under effect and under, oh, I don't have it on here. Let me save this real quick. There should be a plugin loaded, and the plugin for some reason didn't load. So I'm going to go to the Y drive 2200 and just double click that. And it's going to copy my plugins in. Now if you don't have this plugin at home, you could download the trial of the plugin, use the plugin all you want, and then when you come here, it'll just render it fine. At home, you'll get a big X over the top of it if you decide to use any of these plugins.
What is it?
It's the Trapcode Particular. So this one it's by Red Giant. It's called Trapcode Particular, and it's basically is meant to create particles. So it's pretty neat. Some of the stuff that we looked at before had these kinds of things incorporated in them. So if you look, there's all these kinds of things that Particular can do. All right, so that's what we're going to use. Because what I want to do is have this raindrop just streaking across the screen. I could probably find a script that would do this. I could probably use another plugin, but I've used Particular before, and even if I don't know this exact way, I can kind of stumble through to get this thing to happen. And if worse comes to worse, I can just duplicate it a bunch of times. Wouldn't want to do that though. Alright, so there's my layer. Under Effect, under Trapcode, there is Particular. There we go. So you'll see here, if I hit play, I get this. Just a bunch of particles kind of flying around. Under my particle, I can specify a particle type. So right now I can specify a glow sphere. Ooh, fancy, like stars. I could do streaks. So if I were to zoom in, you can kind of see like little streaks or streaklets. I could do textured polygons, which would be something. But for this, I want to use a sprite. Okay, and a sprite is just a picture. That's all it is. So if you ever played video games before, original Mario was just a sprite. He was just a little picture. So if I have that sprite, it wants to know, like, hey, where is this sprite coming from? And I have to specify it's coming from layer 55, which is my raindrop. And you'll see, woo, look at that, rain, like right away. Okay? So my experience in Particular, I've used it a little bit. I know kind of where things are. I know how particle systems work, so I know this function was available. But every system's kind of different, so you never know. But look at that, very, very quick. Now, I need this to not go out from the center because that's not how rain works. Rain just falls straight down. So I need to change that stuff. So under the emitter, that's where I can control how this comes out. And there's a bunch of different features. I'll say I want a box. And so imagine like a box inside of our thing. This is going to be coming outward of the box. Okay, so it still looks very similar, but it's just a box shape that's coming out of, instead of what it was, a point. Okay, so I'm going to say for velocity, or direction, there we go. So I'm going to say directional. And I'm also going to say my direction spread. No. I'm going to go down to gravity. I know under physics there's a gravity here. And if I turn gravity on, There we go. So now my rain's going to fall down. That's perfect. Okay, so then I'm just going to adjust this. I'm going to take my position of this in the X and Y. See the little crosshair here? I click that. And I can move this wherever I want the rain to fall. So I'm going to put it like off screen. I'm going to take the emitter size in the X direction and make it big. I'm going to take the Z direction and make that big. Okay, so this will actually fake some sort of 3D depth, even though it doesn't actually have depth. And maybe I want to, let's say gravity is that. Yeah, physics error. All right, that should be fine. All right, so now as I hit play, you can see that I have rain falling down. Now I don't want to see my item there, let's just hide that. Okay, and what's neat is that it's also giving it different sizes because certain items are further away. What I could also do is instead of having it way up top like this, I could go to my emitter and I could like put it inside of a cloud and actually put it like behind a cloud. There we go. So if it's behind my cloud, you'll see how it looks like it's now coming out of the clouds, which could be like a neat effect. For this, I don't want to do that because then I have to duplicate this a bunch of times and it's just don't need it. There we go. Cool. So now I have water pouring from the sky, which is, again, a pretty neat way to add some enhancements to this. All right? So it's all about these little things that are going to make your animations look better and better and better. All right? Now for the last little bit. I'm not going to go through the Angry Bird part. I'm going to go through the raft part now. So I have this raft right here. And first off, it's like in the middle of this. I want it to be actually in the waves. So like that. Okay, so it's kind of behind this so you can see that the Angry Bird will be bouncing on that. And as the water moves around it, you can see more or less of it. But I want it to also just kind of move with it, right? So I want this thing to look like it's kind of floating on the water, and I'm going to have several of these. So one thing I can do is just use my position. So I can just animate some position keyframes. Oops. Actually, I'll just do a wiggle on this. Let me just do a wiggle and just see what happens with the wiggle. So let's move it every 1 frame or every 1 second, and we'll move it like 30 units. Okay, so now I get this kind of look of it. It definitely is looking like it's moving. So that could come across as being workable. I think this front wave is maybe a little bit too high. I'm going to scoot that down. There we go. Okay, oops, except for there it's kind of floating. So if it's floating, I want to be able to adjust it. So I can just grab the raft, scoot it down. There we go. And I can also set keyframes on this too. I can click my keyframe stopwatch. And then anytime it goes too low, I can just kind of pull it up or pull it down. You don't want to have too many keyframes because that's going to look really funky. There we go. So that looks good right there. It does. I need some more tweaking like in this area to keep it kind of on the water. Okay, so I could go throughout this entire time and just keep playing with that. All right, and then I would duplicate this. I would delete my keyframes, and then I would just scoot it over and just have another one like over here. And then duplicate that again, scoot it over, and have another one up here, and then duplicate it again, and have another one like down there. And I would animate each one of these individually. Maybe I even have one that's in front of wave number 2, or 2 of them that's in front of wave number 2, like that. And then wave 1, maybe you are a little bit taller, and over. There we go. Then I could tweak all of these just to get them kind of lined up so they look like they're on there. So that's, again, one way that I could do this. Now, the other way, I don't expect you to go anywhere near this way. But I want to show it just so you can see the possibilities. Number 4, I believe it is. So right now it's kind of jerky. It still needs some tweaking on it. But do you see how now the rafts are actually kind of floating on the water? Okay, it actually looks like they're riding along that layer. So what I did in this case was I actually wrote an expression, several expressions actually. And those expressions go through and they find transparency. Okay, so they basically find where is the edge of this specific item, and then it puts what's called a null. So these guys here, there we go. These guys here are just nulls. They're just used as an expression type thing in order for us to help parent and organize stuff. So it basically, if you look at this one here, this is, I have to go one frame at a time. There you go. It's not updating here. Let me go back to my other version where I know it updates on number 2. There it is. All right, so if you watch it, you'll see that it goes, or it should be going. I don't know why it's not. There it goes. It's not updating right away, but if I go back a frame and go forward a frame, it is. So you can see how it's kind of riding that edge. So using this one here, it basically finds a point and it rides that edge. It takes this one and rides this edge. And then this guy in the middle is like the average. So I've added these positions here and here, found the average for the center one, and then using some other math, I can find this angle, and that's how I got this raft to follow that thing. Again, I don't expect you to do this, but I just want you to see the possibilities for it. So here's all the expressions that I wrote for this in order for this whole thing to work. Okay, so I'm finding position, finding position, finding position, and then doing some other stuff. And this is just right here, all of this is just for the rotation. That's all that one is, just to make sure it rotates the same way as the other ones. And if I go to here, this is, from this point up to this, is finding the position of where the raft should be. And then these ones, right here, yes, right about there. That's actually finding out where it is transparent. Okay, now again, I'm not expecting you to be masters of these kinds of things, but at this point, it's a good time to start playing with expressions and start playing with stuff that you can do. Okay, let me show a quick example before I get to that. This is, start off with your background. Animate your background, make sure your background works, make sure you're liking the way everything's happening there, and then you're just gonna animate your bouncing bird, just bouncing. That's all it is, okay, for now. I'll have more stuff as we go with the Angry Bird. So this is other stuff you could do with expressions. So this is a rotator. This is just a fun thing. So that was just a random thing. Here are some dots. So with this one, you can kind of see it on there that there's like a wiggle expression. So I've animated these dots kind of flying out, and then they have a little wiggle when they get to the corners. And then they're all going to the center. All of these two things that I'm showing here are the exact same way we did our blip type things, where we made one little animation and duplicated it over and over again. So here, this little animation, if I hide all these and turn my adjustment layer off and this off. So I just animated this one thing going like this. Doot, 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 doot. And then I duplicated it. And then offset it. And then I duplicated it and offset it. And then duplicated it and offset it. So we get this kind of neat little gadgety type thing. Now the little bars that are connecting it, I used what's called a beam. Okay, so under Effect, Generate, there's a thing called a beam right there. And it has a start point and an end point. So I didn't want to copy animations from one spot to another. I wanted to link animations. Okay, so what I did was I went to the beam here, and I'll do it on this one. So I'm just going to turn these off. Okay, so this is just a regular beam. You can see it going straight across, doesn't do anything. I alt-clicked on the beam here, then I can use this lasso and have it connect to a certain point. So I can say, hey, go to this point. Oops, I have to go to the position. There we go. So I click that again, let me click the lasso, and I'm just going to direct it to this position. And so that writes an expression that says, this point, follow that position. And I'll do the same thing to the end point. Click this, follow that position. And so now, as long as I did the correct ones, which I did, you can see how they're all connected. Okay, if I turn the expression off, you'll see that I have a hole in my little bar. But the neat thing about this is because it's an expression, they're linked together. So if I change the animation of the ball, it'll change the animation for my expressions. It's just an automatic linking. Okay, so as you start working on your stuff, think of ways you can enhance your animations. Think of ways you can make them better. Think of things you can add to your specific stuff. There we go. Okay, and then what is that's this one? I thought I'll add those two together. And then I got this really neat pattern. This is how I learn stuff. It's just kind of let's see what happens. So this here, you can kind of see this kind of curvy pattern happening. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. What if I just went crazy and just added a bunch of things? And it didn't turn out very good. But all of these, it's all expressions. There's no keyframe set on any of these. It's just expressions connecting things together. That's it. And if I have, where's my shapes? Right here. So if I look, here's the expression. So just so you can see this process of why expressions are so awesome. I'm going to turn off my motion blur so we can see it. Here's one item kind of moving around. I'm going to duplicate it. Now I have two items kind of moving around. I can duplicate it again. And just by duplicating it, because they have expressions on them, it automatically gives them random motion. And if I need to change any of those, look how easy it is just to delete, change one of these. Maybe 60 was good. There we go. And then I can duplicate this a bunch of times. And now I have this really organic-y like thing. Now I could very quickly just change a bunch of parameters and get even more stuff. Let's say I wanted them all to be different scales. I go to my scale, I alt-click, and I just go to math.random. Let's say let's say 20, 100. And if I typed it right, which I didn't, every program language has a different way. So I usually have to jump up here and say random, just random. So I was right, I just didn't put the other stuff. 20, 100. Apparently not. Let's just put 100. Oop, that's what I was doing wrong. It's giving me one random number and it needs two. So I'm just going to say value equals random 20, 100, value, value. Come on, random, oh. There we go. All right, let's try this again just so I can, now that I have the wording correct. I'm going to go to a random number, and I'm going to say random min value of array. Yeah, that's what I wanted. I'm not sure why it didn't work last time. 20, how long? The other thing that I usually forget is just the naming stuff. Let's call this XY. If you use something that already exists, it doesn't like that. There we go. All right. All right, so now you can see this is kind of like strobing, which is kind of annoying. So I'm going to go and add a seed random. I believe that's the correct wording. Nope. Oops, let me go back to this. Random. Oh, timeless equals false. That's what I forgot to put in there. Or timeless equals true. Every program has their own stuff, so just like hotkeys, if you forget your hotkeys, then it's very difficult to go back into it. There we go. All right, so I forgot the 0 at the beginning. All right, so now if I duplicate this, you can see not only do I get a bunch of random objects scaled and positioned, but their animations are different. So we really get this kind of neat effect that we could create. And we could even go further, and I could add stuff like color adjustment. So if I go to my color correction and I go to hue and saturation, I could alt-click on the master hue. You can see how it's changing the color, right? So if I I'm going to actually go to colorize and then alt-click on the colorize hue, and then just do the same exact thing. Seed random 0, timeless equals true, and I'm just going to give this a random number. And then it's going to say, oops, I forgot the quotation marks and the quotation marks. And that gives me a different error.
Is this how they create the plugins to sell?
Yeah.
They write them out and then save as a script?
Yep.
How do they do it for something like Trapcode?
What do you mean?
How do they package Trapcode?
Oh, how do they do that? They have other stuff that's going into the backside of it. So their plugin has these as the driving force, but then everything else is kind of in the background. If you, like anything, you don't know how to do it, you can Google it. Random color After Effects expression. And all you need is just that little chunk of code. And once you get that chunk of code, that's what I typed. Maybe it doesn't like the 0. Nope. It doesn't like me. Not today, anyway. Type in random, play it. Random, press enter. Let me go back to this one. Nope, this one. There it was. So I typed in that seed random wrong. All right, so there's a random color. Let me make the saturation a bit more. Let me make the lightness a bit more. And now I duplicate this. And again, I'm stuck with that, where I get all of these different colors very quickly, different sizes, different positions, different animations.
So you create your own Trapcode.
Right, and you make your own like little plugin type things. And then I could always make a new adjustment layer on here if I don't like the colors it chose. And then on the adjustment layer, I could add a color correction and say tint this. And the blacks I want to be tinted dark green, and the whites I want to be tinted a light green. And so now I have, instead of having their colors, I have my own color range, but it's just a variance of it. I can do the same thing with opacity, the same thing with rotation, the same thing with any of these. Just these little chunks of code, like that, go a long way, making this seed randomly time, like that, and then having it wiggle or having it be random. That alone can just save you a whole bunch of time. Okay, so take some time, play around with expressions a little bit. Even if you don't know them right away, I'm not expecting that. I expect you to struggle with them a little bit and then eventually figure out how they're functioning. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that if this has 2 values, then you need to give it 2 values. If it has 1 value, you need to give it 1 value. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay? All right. So start off with your Angry Birds. Make sure you build all your stuff. Then make sure you can take your background in and start animating the background. And then we'll go over another day how to animate the Angry Bird in the scene. Okay? All right.